Hello. No, you're broadcasting now, so I can't. Mic check, mic check.
Right, hello and good evening. Thank you for joining us at the InventoryBase Academy webinar on GDPR. There are still some people joining us, so it's going to give everyone a few more minutes just to join in and settle. If you could let me know that you can hear me okay and it's not too loud, etc., that would be great. You may notice that there's a welcome information regarding the last webinar we did, objective and subjective evidence. Apologies for that, just didn't get a chance to change it before we started, so please ignore that. If you're able to just let me know whether you can hear me okay and that you can see the screen. You should have a Welcome to InventoryBase Academy webinar screen in front of you. Right, we'll just give everyone just one more minute. Right, I think we can start now. We've still got people joining us, but hopefully it will be all quite clear as we move along. So just some basic housekeeping. The webinar itself is going to be around about 45 minutes. Obviously, I'm very much aware it's early evening, everyone's got things to do and it's still gorgeous weather out there. So maybe everyone's got a barbecue or something sorted for this evening. So hopefully we'll keep it to the 45 minutes. In the last webinar, we did have some questions being posted as we went along, and I'll try and answer them as best I can. But what we'll be doing is capturing all of your questions and then feeding that back at the either at the end of the webinar or certainly when we email out both the slides, the recording, and some other material that we're going to be sending out to you. So if I don't get to answer your questions, apologies, but we will certainly answer them once the webinar is finished and we said we email out. So today's webinar is about GDPR and how it affects inventory professionals. My name is Sian Hemming-Metcalf. I'm actually an inventory provider myself. I'm a hands-on inventory provider, and I've been providing reports, risk assessments, Legionella risk assessments, etc., for around about 4 or 5 years now. So hopefully I've got enough background and understanding of the processes involved with inventories, etc., to give you some hopeful, useful information as we go forward. So today or this evening we'll be covering what is GDPR, we'll be covering personal data, also how that personal data is used in regards to legitimate interest versus consent, the role of the data protection officer, and also InventoryBase and GDPR, how InventoryBase themselves are going to help you manage your role and obviously information in regards to GDPR. So that's what we'll be covering this evening. So GDPR was originally enacted in May 2016 and it comes into force in May 25th this year. It applies to all 28 EU member states. Let me just close that. And compliance is mandatory. We don't have any choice about this. It replaces the Data Protection Act and it's mandatory for all organisations controlling and processing any personal data of EU residents. yes, I know that we're coming out of the EU at some point, but we will still be adopting all of these policies, so they will still be in play as we go forward. And this applies to entities both outside of the EU as well, if offering goods or services to EU residents. And as it shows, clock's ticking, we're not far away from May 25th. We have had a 2-year lead in, but there is a bit of a scramble to get ready for May 25th. But what I would say is, certainly from inventory providers' point of view, wouldn't panic. We are not going to be, someone's not going to be there with a great big stick ready to beat us if we aren't exactly ready on that date. But obviously the idea is to get yourself as ready as you possibly can, and also make sure that you've got the key components that is required for GDPR ready for both yourself and your clients and your staff, etc. Sorry, my slides aren't playing ball. Right, there we go. So there are some fines associated with GDPR. At the moment, they are set at up to 20 million euros or 4% of your global turnover. And certainly for, I think, bigger organisations, there are going to be issues in regards to class actions, and there is inevitably going to be some kind of compensation either required, issued, or being sought by various people, depending on what's happening with their data and how it's being processed, and obviously any impacts on them. I would say certainly for inventory providers, I think that is not exactly unlikely, but very low risk as it stands at the moment. But I wouldn't necessarily look at it that it's never going to happen. And as we find with a lot of these new rules, etc., someone at some point will be made an example of. So it's not necessarily something you shouldn't worry about, but I wouldn't say that you need to panic over at this moment in time. So, but as I said, there are some risks for inventory providers. You've got brand and reputation damage if you're not ready. There's likelihood nowadays for more complaints by either tenants, landlords, or letting agents, especially because everyone's more informed. Tenants are more informed of their rights, which is perfectly right. But obviously then that comes with it sometimes complaints, etc. Obviously, if there's large-scale infringements, then that could involve mass complaints, etc. But similarly, us as smaller industries and providers, we will be scrutinised, we will be looked at. It's not something that we can just go under the radar. It will affect us, it does apply to us, so therefore we do need to be able to manage it correctly. So basically, time to get all your ducks in a row. I personally see this change of going from data protection to GDPR as an opportunity. It helps you evaluate how you're going to collect and store data. Often we've got a load of data. I certainly, as a provider myself, have got loads of data that I don't necessarily even need or need to do anything with, or just store it because I've got it and I don't really know what else to do with it. So I think it's an opportunity to sort that out. Clear out unnecessary information. So if you don't need it, then why do you need to keep it? It's taking up extra space and you're trying to find somewhere to put it, and then remember why it is that you actually had it in the first place. It's always also an opportunity to be seen as trustworthy and forward thinking, because you're on the ball, you're looking at what the latest legislation is about, you're looking at how it applies to you, how it applies to your clients, to the tenants, to the landlords, to your staff as well. And you get ready for it so that people can see how you as a provider look after both people's personal information and also the attention to detail you pay, not in only your reports but also in how you manage your business. And it also allows you to have a more balanced approach to your risks as a provider. And risks could be obviously risks to your staff personal data, to tenants data, to landlords, to letting agents. So it's an opportunity certainly from my point of view, to actually look at what you've got, work out what you need, what you don't need, and only store what is actually necessary, which is the basic principle of GDPR. So personal data, what's the definition? So this is directly from the ICO website, which is the Information Commissioner's Office, who are the main government body that will deal with GDPR and data protection, etc. And personal data is any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person, and they kind of like broaden that into data subject. So you'll see or hear a lot about data subject, access requests, data subjects, and a natural person is someone that's living. And as you can see from the slide, is anyone that's identifiable, natural person. It can be identified directly or indirectly. This is through either things like their email address, their name, their date of birth, their actual current address, anything that you could then say, well, that's that person in particular. So if you look at it yourself, what then says that this is who you are? So it's all about that data information, and it makes you the data subject. And that includes tenants, includes employees, clerks, landlords, contractors. It'll also involve letting agents, depending on what kind of information you're sharing, etc. So it's there all everybody's personal data. And processing means any operational set of operations performed upon personal data or set of personal data, and whether that's automated, whether you're collecting emails, you're talking to people, you're recording, you're writing notes, you're using the app for, say, email addresses or contact numbers when you're contacting tenants to make appointments or checkouts, etc. So it's any part of that role includes the processing, the use of that data, and that's where it's deemed as being processed. So there's two parts to processing data. One of them is being a controller, one is being a processor. Now, certainly from my point of view as an inventory provider, I see us as a mixture of both controller and also a processor. So from a controller point of view, as you can see, it's someone who determines the purpose and the means of the processing personal data, and that includes tenant names, addresses, contact information, staff personal data. So this includes not just whoever you provide the service to, but also your own staff and who you talk to and use in order to carry out your role or provide your service. Also landlord contact information, also contractor information. If, for argument's sake, you use third-party contractors to do your EPCs, your Legionella risk assessments, etc. That's all part and parcel of controlling information, and it's all about the controller gaining that information, then deciding what happens with that information going onwards. So for argument's sake, as a controller, it would be any direct contact I have maybe with a tenant or landlord or with a staff member. Now, one of the things you have to be aware of is that you should only have and need the information you need in order to carry out the task at hand. So when you're looking at all this information, you only should have what you need to do the job. You can see in the lower right corner, it says register with the ICO. Now, at the moment, there seems to be a lot of discussion around whether companies like ours, i.e. small inventory providers, should register with the ICO. I've actually gone through that process. Very quick, very easy, very painless, and not exactly costly either. I think it was £35 for the year. And the ICO took me through a registration process. They talked me through what it is we're actually doing as a provider, as a service. What information are we collecting? Why are we collecting it? What we're doing with it? And from that, they could determine our role, and we're classed as a tier 1. And then that determines then how much we pay for a yearly subscription to the ICO, which is obligatory, and it helps them fund obviously all their work that they do with the government and also with all the legislation, and it helps them obviously pay for that legislation and pay for the website and everything else. So it's something you should definitely look at and do. There's a process on the ICO website where you can go through and determine whether you are exempt from registering with them or exempt from the payment that's required, or whether you should be registered. And if for any reason you find that difficult, then you can actually ring up someone in the ICO and they will talk you through it. So I said I did it. I think it took me about 10-15 minutes. It wasn't particularly difficult, and it just helps cement what it is that you're meant to be doing in regards to GDPR. We've been issued with a certificate and also a guidance as to what we should be looking at. So it's a very useful process. So I wouldn't ignore that. I would ask the questions and then see how you get on. So as a controller, I'm effectively determining what we're doing with that personal data, but there's also another element to what we do, which is a processor. So we're processing that information and we're doing something with it, we're acting on it. But as a processor, the GDPR rules and articles places a very specific legal obligation on you. In example, that you're required to maintain records of personal data and also your processing activities. Excuse me. And with this, there is a legal liability that if for any reason any data you hold is breached, I don't know, you're hacked, or you've given out wrong data, or you've used data, maybe for argument's sake, you've sent an email to a tenant about information about a property and themselves, and you've actually sent it to the wrong person, then that's effectively a breach. So you are very much responsible for how you not only collect data, but then how you manage it and disseminate it forward. So you need to ensure what data you hold, why you have it, what you do with it, and with whom you share it, such as clerks, EPC assessors, anybody else that you are dealing with. So you do need to actually do effectively an inventory of all of the data information that you currently hold on all of both your clients, your tenants, your landlords, your letting agents, and also with your staff as well. So you need to look at what you hold, why you hold it, do you need it, and then look and seek potentially to get permissions to retain and use that information going forward. So certainly from a provider, certainly from my point of view, I'm both a mixture of a controller and a processor. So I'm taking information direct from landlords and tenants, but I'm also taking information or giving information from both landlords, letting agents and third-party contractors in order to carry out our role as an inventory provider. So hopefully that's quite clear, but one thing I would say is ICO website is extremely detailed. They have taken a great deal of care in making sure that all of their information that they provide is very clear, in plain speak. So I would definitely recommend that you visit that website to see and read through the various articles and get an understanding better of what it is that you need to do. But hopefully we'll be able to give you some help with that. So in regards to processing data, there are certain grounds for processing data, and these are consent, contract, legal obligation, vital interests, public tasks, and legitimate interest. And one of the things that I had to do when I was speaking to the ICO to work out exactly how at my organisation, my service provides my service that provides information and deals with data, etc., what grounds we're actually using in order to process that information. Now, Article 5 of the GDPR requires that personal data should be lawfully processed, but it's also got to be fairly and transparently processed. And it's got to be collected for a specific and specified purpose. And this has got to be legitimate. You just can't just have anybody's data to do whatever you want to. If you've got to have a reason for having it. It's also got to be adequate and relevant in relation to what it is you're doing with that data, i.e. why you have it, what task you're actually looking to either do or result you're trying to achieve. And it's got to be kept in a form that's permits identification of the data subjects for no longer than is absolutely necessary, i.e. for the time period that you need to be able to do that job, to do that task. So for argument's sake, if you've got information in regards to a tenant for a checkout, you've booked it, you are looking to make contact with that tenant, book the report, carry out the report, and then send that off to either the commission authority, be that the tenant themselves or the landlord or letting agent. So at what point that task is complete? So then what I would be asking myself is, do I need to keep that information? And certainly from ICO point of view, they're looking to me to say, well, okay, well, if you're going to have that information and you've completed that task, but you've still got that information, why do you need it? And you've got to be able to justify that. So it's about looking at the various tasks that you are doing as an inventory provider to see what information it is that you are collecting, using, and then how long you actually need to have it. So in regards to the actual grounds, certainly from an inventory provision point of view, and certainly from my point of view, there are two specific grounds that we rely on. One is consent, one is legitimate interest. So with consent, you're basically saying to that person that you're holding the data, can I have permission to hold your information? Can I have your permission to have your email, your contact number, your address, etc., whatever it is you need to carry out the task that you are either commissioned to or employed to do. And as you can see, there's quite a comprehensive list of reasons and kind of like requirements that you need to fulfill in order to both gain that consent, have that consent, and obviously rely on that consent. And one of the things that it does require is a positive opt-in. So it's not a case of where you can have the information on the tenant just because you've got it and someone's given it to you. You've got to have an actual positive opt-in. They've got to agree. They've got to say yes. So whereas beforehand, I think, you know, in years gone by, we've had loads of issues in regards to where people have maybe signed for products or I don't know, financial products, and there's like a pre-tick box and you haven't really paid any attention to. Well, you can't do that anymore. You have to have positive opt-in. You've got to have explicit consent that's very clear, very specific, and you've also got to state that what that consent is and what you're relying it on. So certainly from your privacy policies and your GDPR policies that you should have on your website and on your terms and conditions, they should all say exactly what it is you as a provider are going to be using that information for, how you're going to get it, and what permissions you've got to actually process that information. And you've also got to make it easy for people to withdraw the consent, so they can say, actually, no, I don't want you to use that information anymore. And you've got to give them that opportunity, and you've got to be very clear that they have that right, and you've got to give them that right. It's not a case of, well, you know, it's in my terms and conditions buried away somewhere in subsection whatever. You've got to be very, very clear with it. You've got to say, this is what you can do, this is how you can withdraw consent, and this is how you do that. So you've got to be very, very clear. The ICO actually have, as you can see on the bottom part of that slide, an interactive tool to help you understand what lawful basis you could or should use. And it's a very useful insight into what you do in regards to your processes, how you use data and what for, to help you understand exactly how you then go forward. Excuse me. So I would definitely recommend using it. It's quite useful, it's quite intuitive, it's not particularly difficult to understand, but you do need to follow the steps. But certainly I found it really, really helpful to understand exactly what it is I'm using that data for. So that's consent. Then the other basis, certainly that we use, is legitimate interest. And what we have to ask yourself, is the processing necessary for the legitimate interests or legitimate interests of a third party, unless, of course, there's a reason to protect the individual's personal data which overrides that legitimate interest. A little bit complicated, possibly, but bear with me. So in order to determine how you get to that legitimate interest basis, there's three elements, and ICO, what they do is they suggest that you look at it as a three-part test. So you effectively need to be able to identify a legitimate interest, show that the process is necessary to achieve it, and balance it against the individual's interests, rights and freedoms. So it's not as, in a way, it's just as complicated as consent, but in a way a little bit more complicated, but actually in a way easier, if that makes any sense whatsoever, because it's giving you a really good, easy to understand process to work out, okay, can I rely on this, or do I need consent, or what basis am I actually going to be relying on? So the purpose test is, the first one is purpose test, are you pursuing a legitimate interest? The necessity test, is the processing necessary for that purpose? And then the balancing test, do the individual interests override that legitimate interest? So there's your three elements to that test. So to put it into context, and don't worry about writing or jotting any notes down on this particular slide, because this will come out with both the information pack with the slides and the recording, and also I've done some generic templates in order to help you map and understand and build on your information and answer these tests, so that you can have a better understanding of what it is as a provider you are, well, so as a provider, what basis you are using in order to process data. So the example I've got here is one that we've all done or are doing, is that we've got a shared HMO and that we need the personal data of the tenants in order to book all the ongoing bi-monthly reports. So for that, you actually need to both have the data, and you also need to be able to process the data and keep it for a certain period of time. In this particular example, we've got 12 months. So the purpose test, so part one, the example question here is, what would be the impact if you couldn't go ahead with the processing, i.e. you didn't have that information, you couldn't use it? And as you can see, the answer is it'd be very difficult. You wouldn't be able to contact the tenants, you wouldn't be able to gain the access that you need, you wouldn't be able to carry out the report, you wouldn't be able to deal with any health and safety breaches, unauthorised occupancy, because you wouldn't have that access, because you didn't have that information or the data to rely on. So that's your part one. Your part two necessity test is, will this processing actually help you achieve your purpose? So in this example, yes, it would. So it would enable to contact tenants, arrange a date and time convenient to everybody, inspect the property, but also then respecting their rights and their privacy, and give you opportunity to make sure the health and safety of the tenants is maintained. So that's your second test. Then on your third test, you're looking at, is the data which people are likely to consider particularly private? Well, yes, it would be, because it's probably their name, their telephone number, or mobile number, email address. So that all comes under GDPR. So yes, that is private. So therefore, it does come under GDPR rules. And then the other question is, did you collect data directly from the individual? So you've got consent, or how else did you collect it? So in this example, no, it's from the letting agent. So letting agents obviously let the property, and it's now asking you to carry this task out on their behalf. So you didn't do it directly. So the consent side of that, of this balancing test, is not there. But in the third part of the balancing test, you've got, would individuals lose any control over the use of their data? So you should have in place very strict protocols, and certainly from my point of view, we do, in that we only keep data for the sole purpose of booking that particular property inspections or those visits going forward, and that at the end of their tenancy, that information, that personal information, is deleted from the InventoryBase booking system at point of checkout. So I am basically saying that I'm using legitimate interest as my basis, my legal basis for having that data, but I'm also showing that I'm only using it for what it's actually needed for. And then once it's actually, those jobs or those visits are concluded, then that information is deleted from the system, so I don't need it anymore. So I'm complying with the rules of GDPR in regards to only keeping data that is necessary, and it's specific to the task, and also then I'm not keeping it for any longer than is actually necessary. So there's your three tests: your purpose test, your necessity test, your balancing test. And then from that, you will effectively create a legitimate interest assessment, a risk assessment. And what you should be asking yourself then, once you've looked at all of those, those three tests, is then say, okay, well, have you shown or demonstrated a legitimate interest from that? Yes or no? Can you show or demonstrate that the processing is necessary to achieve it? I would say yes. Have you balanced it against individuals' rights and freedoms? Yes, you have, because you're aware of the fact that you should only have that information specific to the task, and that you have already got plans and processes in place to make sure it's deleted once it's not necessary. And can you rely on legitimate interest for this processing? And certainly for this example, I would say yes. And then you've got an area here to justify your comments and your answers if you need to. If there's anything specific that you want to have shown, should you be asked by ICO or any other interested body. And then an area there to say who it's completed by and when it's done. And you should keep this and keep it under review. So it's almost like an open document, a bit like you would do your health and safety policy. It's a case of keeping it fluid, open, always revisiting it, making sure that you're using the right basis, because some tasks, some jobs, some information might not necessarily fit into legitimate interest. And it also would then mean is that if that's not a lawful basis for you to rely on, then you need to look at what other basis, i.e. consent, contracts, public, etc., to be able to process that data. Otherwise you could then fall foul of ICO laws, and obviously then effectively you could open yourself up to complaints and issues, etc. So that's kind of like a brief example of how legitimate interest would apply to us as inventory providers, but hopefully you can see how that works and the kind of questions you should be asking yourself. But equally, you can also see that it's not particularly difficult. You just got to sit and give it some thought once you've obviously done an inventory of your data information, and then you can then look, okay, I've got all this information, this is what it is. Now, what legal basis am I using? Am I using consent? Am I using contractual? Am I using legitimate interest? And certainly as an inventory provider, my basis are both consent, if I'm talking directly to the landlord or the tenant, but also majority of the time, legitimate interest, because I can prove that I need that information to be able to carry out the role that we are tasked with. Hopefully that will make sense. But again, like I said, I've written all this out. We've got a white paper on this subject. Also, I've written a comply, protect, more extensive paper, and with that I've done quite a few templates to help you understand and build on what it is that you're reading in regards to ICO, what you understand of your own service provision, and help you map and understand what it is that you need to do in order to comply with GDPR. And that will all come through at the end of, not this session, but once we've finished recording, and then we will send that all out to you as an extra bonus for attending. You have to excuse me, I need a quick drink. Now, you're doing all of this work, you've got all this information, and someone's got to deal with it. So this is where a data protection officer would come into play. Now, I spoke to ICO, and from their point of view, they don't require us to have a data protection officer. However, I've decided that yes, we will, purely because I think it makes much more sense to have one, because then it means then we've got someone dealing with GDPR, concentrating on it, and then can get, have a really good grasp and understanding of it, and also be the person to take us forward in relation to understanding both the principles, applying the principles, and also ensure that we keep on track going forward, that we don't kind of fall off the wagon and we revert back to how we were dealing with people's personal data prior to GDPR. Now, a data protection officer can be any member of staff, but they should be in a position to carry out their duties without any interference. So I wouldn't suggest that if you've got a big organisation that you leave it to the admin person that comes in 2 days a week, etc. So you need someone with authority. They should be sufficiently well resourced to be able to perform those tasks, so they've got the time and the ability to carry out the role of data protection officer. And certainly from my point of view, they're tasked with both compliance, but also other data protection laws, policies, awareness training and audits, and anything to do in relation to GDPR itself. This way then you've got a person that is well versed, they understand the principles, they can apply it to your business because they're working in the business, they understand how it all works, and also certainly from like a tenant or landlord or letting agent point of view, they've got a go-to person to either ask questions about, or if they require or need to submit a subject access request. And a subject access request, an SAR, is either you or me or anybody going to an organisation. So, okay, I would like to know what it is in regards to personal data you hold on me, and we have to provide that. So that should also form part of your policy. And I've done example SIR templates, both as a person who is asking for the information in regards to me as a person, or if it's a secondary party, maybe a solicitor or a different interested individual that wants that information. So there's some templates in there to help you understand what it is that someone might ask, and then how you might then deal with that. So I would argue that even if you're not required to provide a DPO, I would have one. I think it will make life easier going forward, and it's great to have someone with that skill set, that understanding, to help you understand your own business, especially if you're building your business and you are getting more work, which means more data. Someone needs to be able to manage that for you. And as a sole provider, you're kind of like you're wearing all the hats of the business. But as you expand and you've got more staff, and maybe you've got self-employed clerks or employed clerks, etc., you would then need to have someone else to help you with that. So I would definitely say to designate someone to do that role and give them the skills and the understanding to be able to carry out that role. So how does InventoryBase help you comply? So in regards to InventoryBase and GDPR principles, a data subject has the right to rectification. So this means basically any client and contact information at any time that you have on a person can be either corrected or deleted to make sure that that information is correct. There's also a right to be forgotten. If you or I receive a request of a right to be forgotten, you can delete that contact either from the booking system or from your information or your accounts or whatever, or however, you collate that information, be it on spreadsheets, etc. So there's a right to be forgotten. So from an InventoryBase point of view, that as long as it's a valid request, you can either delete the information off the system yourself, or people can actually contact InventoryBase direct, and they will do it on the subject behalf, and also let you know how that they've done that, and making sure that everybody's complying with GDPR. There's also a right of portability. So if the contact requests the personal data to be exported, that can be done. There's also a right of access, and this actually needs to be in your existing privacy policy to say how you're going to manage your customers' data and how you're going to manage your contacts request, which is your SARs, and also what you do and can print about that data. So you've got right of access, right of portability, right to be forgotten, right to rectification. And InventoryBase themselves, when they said they receive a request to be forgotten, they literally will permanently delete and erase the data on their CRM system. So it will no longer exist. They also have newsletters, as you well know. You often receive them. I know I receive them because obviously being a user of InventoryBase, that they'll email the customer a double opt-in. So basically there's a request to say, okay, do you want to opt in? And then make sure that that person's happy for that information, that data to be collected, to be used. And in regards to the cloud storage, when they receive a request to be forgotten, or that the records are no longer being used or required, then that's all deleted off the cloud storage drives. So from you as an InventoryBase user, you can be assured that these systems, these steps, these protocols are already in place to effectively complement what it is that you're doing in regards to your own business and your own policies, and what it is that you are doing in regards to GDPR, so that it's not just a single-pronged approach, it's a multiple-pronged approach, so that that InventoryBase are taking their but I can't think of the word now, I've lost it, their responsibilities extremely seriously and are complying with GDPR. Because obviously if you are dealing with clients who are using the system, then they will also be looking to you to say, okay, well, what are you doing with our data? How are you managing it? What systems are you using? What are they doing with it? So you need to know and be able to explain to them exactly how data is stored, when it's deleted, how it can be deleted, and give your clients that protection. So in regards to GDPR itself, everything is about recording, everything is about capturing the information, but also showing that information, where it is, how it is, and also only keeping it for when or as long as you need it. So you should have a privacy policy, and within that privacy policy you should state how you manage and record personal data, what you're going to use it for, who's it shared with, why is it shared, what do you do in regards to things like subject access requests, what's the process, etc. And one thing I would say is be open and honest with tenants. Make sure that when you're speaking to them, because obviously if you're getting the information from a letting agent, you're dealing with it as a processor, but as a controller and dealing with tenants direct, you need to make sure that they're aware of their rights and also what your obligations are to them in regards to their personal data. And you need to be able to state which basis you are relying on to process that data that you are holding, which is why you need to do that inventory of all the data you've got, what it is, where it is, what you're doing with it, why you need it, what lawful basis you're using in order to process that data, to use that data, and then also what happens then when you no longer need to keep that data. And one of the things that I would definitely recommend is that you have a removal log. So when you delete data, it's not just a case of you're taking that information off the system and goes, well, I'm done. Well, that's great, but what happens if ICO or you get a subject access request say, well, okay, what information do you hold? You say, I don't hold any. They say, well, you must have done because, you know, I've spoken to you, we've talked, you've rung me. How do I know it's deleted? So by having a removal log, something to actually written down to say that on this date, I received a subject access request, or we deleted the tenant information data at the point of checkout because it was no longer required. So I would suggest you definitely have a removal log just to make sure that you are complying with the GDPR principles of Article 5 and that you're only keeping data that you need for specific tasks and to ensure that that processing is legal. You've got a lawful basis to hold it. So that is a very quick end to the webinar. There's a lot of information in regards to GDPR, and I would say the best place to go and look and to read about GDPR and get an understanding of what the requirements are for you and your business is on the ICO website. Every article is there. It's easily explained. They've got toolkits to help you understand. I think they're also just about to send out a communications package to help your clients understand exactly what it is that you need to do in regards to compliance. They've got toolkits in order for you to understand, okay, what legitimate basis, what lawful basis you're using to processing that data, whether you need to be ICO registered, and general help and guidance. And one thing I have found with them is that they are very helpful both on the phone and also online. But there's also a wealth of information out there on the internet. Now, there's a lot of kind of gurus, for want of a better phrase, that seem to have emerged from the introduction of GDPR, mostly in the last, say, 6 months or so, I would argue. So I would be careful about what it is you are looking for from the different services that are out there. I mean, there's some really good services out there, and I will be sending out some links to some services that I think that you might find useful, not affiliated to them in any way, shape or form. It's just that I've been speaking to them, talking to them, watching what they're saying, listening, and found that their information is very useful and very helpful. But I would certainly suggest that you look to have someone in the role of a DPO to help you understand and manage the role of the GDPR and the processes, etc., so that certainly from your point of view, you are compliant with GDPR and that you're setting in motion all the right processes so that going forward it's an easy process to manage and to understand, and also to explain to everybody as well. So that's our webinar for this evening. We are literally almost bang on the 45 minutes. I will certainly be sending out the recording of this webinar and also the comply and protect information, the white paper, and also the raft of templates that I've drawn up, including any acknowledgements where we've looked to other resources to see how they do their templates, so that you can see exactly what's required and also go forward and start developing your own policies. What I would say is certainly before the 25th of May, I would get in place basic process, including your privacy policy, and also make sure that you've done an inventory of your data to ensure that you have a really good understanding of what data you hold, why you hold it, and so you can then move forward with the rest of GDPR. I don't expect huge fines or any real big, I don't know, end of year, you know, we get I can't remember the name of it now, where you get to the end of the year and all the computers will go to pot, etc. You won't get anything like that at all. I think we will see 25th of May come, and then everyone will just continue to progress into the GDPR role. But certainly for now, I would certainly say get your inventory done, get your policy and GDPR policy sorted out so that you know where it is you're going from there. Okay, well, again, can I thank you indeed for your time. It's a lovely evening. I hope you have time to enjoy the rest of the evening, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thank you.